Okay, so here we go with a brief video on how to do cell names, which is a very powerful feature of Excel that absolutely rocks. Um, you should be familiar with the warehouse problem where we used three different references to different cells. And the fact is, these formulas are rather hard to read because they're just these computer symbols with dollar signs and letters and numbers. These values have no intrinsic meaning to us. As a matter of fact, it's so hard to interpret these values that Excel, when you click in a cell like this one here, and then you click up here in the formula bar, it will actually highlight the cells to point them out to you to give you a better chance of understanding what the formula does. But there's a much better way of doing this, and I'm going to step over here to the named ranges. It's the same problem all over again, except that we're not going to write formulas that use cell names. We're going to give our own names to things. So the first thing I want to do is give this cell a name of its own. Right now, Excel thinks of it as C2, but I want to give my own name, and I'm going to call that daily storage cost. Now, these names should be long and meaningful because I'll show you in a moment, once you type a name in the name box at the top here, you don't have to type it ever again. The other thing is names cannot have blanks in them, so I use what's called camel case, where I simply capitalize the first letter of each word. So when I hit enter, now that cell has a name. So if I clicked on this cell, just for example, that's B7. But if I click back up here on C2, it now has the name daily storage cost. That's good. Now I want to name these cells here, the 10, 20, and 30. And these I'm going to name days on hand. That's just the name of the label on the cell above it. So I'm going to, this time, instead of naming an individual cell, I'm going to name a whole range of cells. So I'm going to call it days on hand. And then finally, I'm going to do the same thing on containers here. And I'm going to give it just the name containers. And this is naming a range, not an individual cell. So now I've got these names in Excel. When I click on this cell, for example, it's just C6. This one is D6. That one's E6. You don't see the name days on hand because that applies to the whole set of cells, and it only shows up once I select all three cells. That's true here. If I pick on these, I see just their cell letter names. But when I do the whole range, it's containers. Up here, it's daily storage costs. Okay. Now let's write a formula that uses these names. So I come down here and I just type equals days on hand, or a daily storage cost rather. Now notice when I typed the DA, my name showed up in the list along with the built-in function names of Excel that begin with DA. And there's my days on hand. The beauty is once the blue highlight is showing up on the name I want, I don't have to type anymore. I can just press the tab key and Excel will spell it out for me. So it's daily storage cost times containers. I'll type CONT. There's my name. I press the tab key. It completes the spelling. Time days on. So I had to type that far to get it. I press the tab key, it spells it out. I hit enter, and I've got my whole formula here. Now, look at how easy this formula is to read. It's all English with names that are meaningful to me. Compare that to the original version over here, which takes some, it's very geeky and it takes time to figure out exactly what it means. So, back here to named ranges, I have a formula that makes sense. Notice it still uses the color coding for me, and it works fine. Now, one thing that's amazing about this is if I take this formula as it stands and I copy it across and I copy it down, it's going to work in every cell, and they all have exactly the same formula. Now, how did that work? Well, when I gained the name daily storage cost, this single cell, and then when I reference it later, like I did here, because it identifies a single cell, that becomes an absolute reference. So no matter where I put it in the table here, daily storage cost is always going to refer to C2. That's exactly what I want it to do. Now consider the range days on hand. This is a name I gave to a range of cells, not a single cell. It happens to be a horizontal orientation where the container's name is a vertical orientation. So when I took this formula here, notice that when I click on it, it lights the whole container's range, and it lights the whole days on range with the purple outline here and the red outline there, and the single cell that is the daily storage cost. So for the value for days on hand, Excel says, oh, well, that's referring to a horizontal range and it is just directly above me, so I'm going to pick the 10. When it came over to the next cell for days on hand, it says, oh, it's a horizontal range and I'm going to go up to the matching cell, which is the one in the middle here, the 20. So as I dragged it across, it always points at the right cell in days on hand. Even though it's lit or pointing at the whole area here, it's only choosing this one cell because this formula was dragged across horizontally and it went from 10 to 20 to 30. By the same token, the containers points at the 100 here for this formula. This is a vertically oriented name. When I dragged it across over to here, the container still stayed in the same area because I dragged horizontally and it kept pointing at this range, and I got the 100 here, and this one for containers gives me the 200, and this cell for containers gives me the 300. So it works beautifully. It works exactly the way I would like it to. The 10, the 20, and the 30 go across, and the 100, 200, and 300 go down. What you get is a worksheet that's easier to understand because you're looking at human meaningful names, and also a worksheet that's easier to turn over to somebody else to maintain once you've created it because it's got names and then they can refer to them. So that's the basic creating range names by hand. Let's go on and look at how we can use auto naming. Okay, let's look over here. I've got some examples where I have some names on cells here on the left. These are just labels. And then I've got values in them here. So the work order was the WTP water supply line is leaking. The priority is a 2. Here's the date and that sort of thing. So these are labels on a table, and here's the values. Now I could go in and name these things by hand, calling this one work groups, and this one work orders, and this one priority, and so on. But when I have a situation like this, I can have Excel do the naming for me automatically. I'm going to select the whole area of this table, including the labels. Then I'm going to come up to the Formulas tab,